Okay, welcome everyone. This is project stream number 9. It is a journaling video. I have just learned that Twitch mobile does not let me stream in landscape, so that's kind of annoying. We're going to be in portrait, so I apologize for that. I'm going to move a little bit closer to the desk. Today, we are going to be doing my, I guess you'd call it a hybrid weekly daily spread for the next week starting on Monday. Sometimes I start my weeks on Wednesdays in my journal, but a lot of the time I start it on Monday just because that's when my work schedule website starts the week. So I just try to reflect that. But I don't always do that. So I'm doing that currently because the year recently restarted, and it just makes things easier. So let me get started with this. I'm also not going to be talking specifically. I know a lot of bullet journalers and journal video makers do this. I'm not going to be talking specifically about the products I'm using because I don't think that's super important to whether or not this can be useful to you. You can pretty much use any notebook you want. I just use the ones I do because they make things easier for me. I like to have things that can fit in my bag, or if I have big pockets, I could fit this in my pocket. But you don't have to do that. I also don't remember the name of most of the brands of my products once I've purchased them. So, and I don't keep the tags really. I got this one as a gift for my birthday. This notebook leather holder thing, as well as these 3 journals that are in it. Oh yeah, and I think it did come with this insert pocket thing. I haven't put anything in here, but I do use this for some more supplies in the back. I got some scissors and some stickers that I use sometimes, and a ruler in there as well. So this is the next week's spread, and I'll explain how it goes, how it works. You'll see some stuff is already here. I've got a little sticker, and I've got some washi tape, and that's mostly because this paper bleeds really easily, especially when I go over things with multiple pens, of course. So I wanted to cover up some of that with these stickers and washi tape. You can still see I tried to use whiteout to hide some of the stuff, and the whiteout you can kind of see through this washi sticker, but I'm not too worried about it. You'll also see some dots and lines going around the page. I'll explain that. The reason I did it beforehand is because putting the dots and lines takes a long time. I use these dots and lines as guidelines for interlace designs that I do. If we look back to prior weeks, even if I just go to last week, you'll see that there's this sort of interlace border. It's not super elaborate. This is a bit more elaborate than this one, but I wanted to show how I do it, and I'll do that in 2 ways. So you'll see me actually filling this in, which might take some time. I'm going to be chatting while I do that, just so you can see how I fill it in. But I'm also going to set up more dots and spaces, just so you can see how I do that, so that you could potentially also do some interlace in your journal if you'd like to, or just in general. And I use the very easy, almost cheater way of doing interlace. There are a lot of different ways to set up and do interlace artwork that makes it a lot more elaborate. My way is actually it kind of limits you in some ways. There are ways to tweak it so that it's less limiting, but I do find that it's the easiest and quickest way to doodle them. And this is just for some decoration anyway. So it's not too big of a hindrance, in my opinion, using this method just to get started, and then you can research some more. So I'm also going to explain just sort of the setup for this. I like to use a hybrid weekly daily setup because that's just what I found that works for me. I've been journaling for quite a few years now. and bullet journaling in particular for quite a few years. And I've tried a lot of different sort of hybrid methods, and, you know, having the monthly log and the weekly log and the daily log all separate does not really work very well for me. It feels, whenever there's something that's super redundant in a journal, for me, I find that I'm less motivated to use my journal. Sorry, this washi tape is not sticking very well. Might use some glue to secure it if it keeps doing that. Some people find the sort of repetition and redundancy of having like the monthly, weekly, and daily to be super useful because they're getting reminded of things multiple times. And they might put different things in their monthly versus their weekly versus their daily. But I don't have as many things that I know in advance usually when I do. Sort of more monthly stuff is useful for me. But I usually use my mobile calendar for things that are like way in the future. I'll just use my phone. And weeklies and dailies are sort of so intertwined for me because the weekly things that I have that I know are usually just my work schedule, and others sort of like habits that I know I want to keep up with, or like weekly events that happen regularly. And I don't need an entire spread for that. Whereas my dailies are very inconsistent, like whether or not I have the energy to journal more, write more, etc. Whether it be writing down tasks or taking notes on things. So I like to leave it somewhat open to have different lengths for things. Although what I have found is I can sort of map out roughly where I want my space to go. And if I don't use the space for that day, I almost always come up with a way to fill in that space to take notes later, or I decorate it and I do some art. For example, I'll give like this past week. I didn't end up, this was for Tuesday here. I didn't end up writing much for Tuesday, so I had all this blank space, and I used it to do some more interlace, and I used a sticker. And so, yeah, I can typically find ways to fill in the space in that way. There's still some extra space I have here from this past Thursday. I'm going to probably go back in and, you know, do some drawing or something for that. So it's not super wasted space, because you can see in general. So how it works, as you can see, each page is basically roughly 2 days. Now, because there's 7 days in the week, I usually have some extra space for an extra day, or, you know, other notes that I have. If we look on here, this is Saturday down here, so Sunday would theoretically just be half of this page. I ended up using stickers because I know I'm not going to need all of this space for tomorrow. I could even theoretically fit Sunday down here. But I have a lot of open space to take notes, write to-do lists, and that sort of thing. But what you'll see on the side here is I have sort of these sidebars, and I made sort of a Dutch door type situation. This is what I like to do usually. I like to make a Dutch door that still has a border, because it kind of keeps the week together, like, okay, this is this week, but you still have enough space, like most of the page, to actually use. And how I utilize this Dutch door is because I've made this border around it, I use my border to actually write my weekly. So my weekly log, in quotes, is my border. And then my daily log is the actual page. So that's how that works, and I'll explain it a little bit more, because that might be a little confusing, and it might not work for everyone, of course, because everyone has sort of different ways that they use it weekly. But I find that just having these sort of, what you'll see is like 2 squares width is enough for me, because my weekly things are so common that I usually don't need to write in words what they are. I use little symbols, and I'll kind of explain some of those as I go. So I'm going to start by making a header for Monday, since that's going to be the first day in here. And so I'm not going to go ahead and do the rest of the week yet. I might do that later in the video. But I want to show you how I set up my interlace blocks. And you can see this past week I was doing sort of borders around the days of the week in different ways. That's what I like to do usually. But just to make it more simple, I'm going to do a, sort of just like a square, just to mark out the week. I'm going to use some glue to fix this washi tape, because it's really bothering me that it keeps popping up. There we go. Okay. So I like to use a dot grid just because this makes it a lot easier. If you're not using a dot grid, you'll need to do like make dots for squares. Like you'll do squares of dots. You can see like you have a square here. So you'll need to make that, and then what you need to do, and this is why I like using dot grid paper. Well, there are a lot of reasons why I like using dot grid paper, but this is one of the biggest ones, is it more than halves the amount of dots I need to do. Because what I need to do is, once I've established what my space is, I think I'm going to do like a 3x3 square for Monday. Once you have your squares, you actually need to put a dot in the center of each square. So you have a grid of dots, like a square grid of dots, but each square has a dot in the center as well. And that's going to be important for what we're about to do. And I want to see if I can zoom in. Or I might just move my camera down a little bit so you can see better. Okay. So what we have here is our, and it doesn't have to be super perfect, especially because we're going to erase the dots eventually anyway. Either erase or fill it in depending on what medium you're using. I use a pencil so that I can erase the dots, and I use a pen to actually fill it in. But I'll use a pencil to show you for now, because I might not keep this square as my header for this week. I just wanted to show. So what you want to do is imagine diagonal space, like lanes basically, between these dots. That's why we put a dot in the center, because you basically have like a lane going every which way. So if I'm going like here, you can see I'm going up from left to right. I have these lanes, and if I think about it from right to left, or left to right down, we have these lanes. And that's basically how they're going to interlock. And if you've ever weaved a basket or something like that, you know it's just going to go up and down. However, that's not the most interesting thing. I will show you what that looks like though. What I like to do is I like to follow a strand. That tends to make it easier for me, just so that I don't make mistakes. It's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. It'll still look cool, but I like to keep things neat. So what you do is I like to start in a corner, and I like for the corner to be the one that goes up. So if I'm like drawing a little ribbon like that, gone up like that, and then I know there's going to be one that goes here, so I'm actually going to skip this sort of diagonal square diamond space. I'm going to skip it and then sort of resume my ribbon and then skip again, and now I'm in another corner, so I'm going to turn around and do the same thing. So now I have one ribbon that is sort of like this loop, and then I can go the other way. So I like to start at a place where I previously skipped, because I know that there's going to be one going the other way there. So I'm going to start here. I don't have to, but I usually just do that. And then I know that that's going to skip, and then it's going to hit this corner and go around. And I'm going to skip again, and turn around. And that's my second loop. And they interact in the center. And then I have a loop that goes around. I can kind of see that. So if I go for where I skipped here, it's going to turn here, and then it's going to turn here, it's going to turn here, and it's going to turn here. And so what I actually have are two interlocking sort of diagonal ribbons, and then like a diamond shape ribbon going around, linking them on the border. And that is actually, if you don't put anything else other than dots in a 3x3 grid, you're going to end up with that. So some principles that end up being true when you're using this method. If you have two sort of corners that are diagonal from each other and there's nothing obstructing them in the middle, I'll explain what obstructing means in a second, but if there's nothing between them, you're going to end up with like a closed loop like this. Same the other way. So if you want a closed loop that is just like its own strand, you can just put, you know, sort of two diagonal things. That's going to be a loop unless you obstruct it. Now let me explain obstruction a little bit. So let's do the 3x3 grid again. Dot. Okay. Now, what obstruction is, in this method, the easiest way to do it, without, you know, completely messing up the flow of things, there are ways I intentionally mess it up sometimes to sort of make more interesting knots and do special things with them, like if I wanted it to turn into an animal at the end or something, or have legs or something like that. But in general, we have these dots, and I was talking about imagining perpendicular to each other diagonal lines. If you're thinking of like the squares being like this, if we rotate it, then there's straight lines. But since the dot grid goes like that, that's how I'm thinking about it right now. An obstruction needs to connect two dots, either vertically or horizontally. They can't intersect if you want this method to work the normal way. There are ways to intentionally make them intersect and do weird things, but I'm trying to keep this basic for now. So you want to be either going like between dots, like in this direction or in this direction. And you can mix and match them in whatever way. You can also make them come off the wall, so long as they don't intersect, so that like lines can still go through or around them. So like I just kind of randomly put some lines here. You can also make a square, for example, and then you just won't have any knot in there, and it'll just have to go around. But you can still follow the same method of like skipping over, and it will still work. So I'm just going to put these 3 sort of random lines here and see what comes out. And this is kind of what makes it fun. Like, there are ways that you can learn to predict what it's going to do, but I actually don't like to think about it too much. I do think about it a little bit, just given certain patterns that always happen. But I kind of just like discovering what design is going to come about once I've put some lines that I think look cool. So let's start again. I'm just going to start at a corner. I'm going to go up, and I see I hit a wall. So what I do is I'm going to bounce off that wall and turn around. But I'm still going to skip. The next perpendicular is here. And then I go around this corner, skip, and I'm hitting a wall again. So I'm going in this corner, and now the corner is going the other way. So I'm turning around here, and I'm going to skip this because there's going to be something going through here. And then I'm going through this place I skipped earlier, so I've turned back around, and I'm going it's going under itself. And it's going to go through here. We're hitting another, this wall again. So it's going to turn and go up. Skip this one, and it's hitting this corner. It's going to turn back around. And that is one whole thing. Oh wait, actually, no, it's not done. So we just went down, and we skipped this before, so now it's going to turn and go up. It's turning it on itself again. And then skip over this because we already drew that. And it's going to turn here. And I think this is going to all end up being one strand. So you go up through here, turn at the wall, and we're hitting a wall again, so it's going to turn around on itself, and then it's going to go through here, and it connects back. So this all ended up being, instead of, before we had like 1, 2, 3 strands, now we have 1 strand, just because of some of the obstructions that I made that cause it to curl back in on itself. Now at this stage, once you're here, you've done it, you can kind of define the lines more, fill in the gaps, or erase the pencil lines if you used a pen. Sometimes I just, for simplicity, instead of doing like these 2D, it's all 2D, but these sort of like 2-sided strands that make it look like it has volume, I just do a line through it. Just for simplicity. You kind of see that with these ones. I was just sort of doing a line instead of, drawing the 2 sides of the strand like that. Just because it's quicker, and that's probably what I'm going to do with my border today. But hopefully that makes sense, what I was explaining with the obstructions. What you don't want to do is diagonal lines through your obstructions, because diagonals are already how it's going to go, so you're not actually going to be obstructing anything. One thing you can do is, I will explain a little bit more of an advanced thing. So let's say this is like the edge of something, and instead of putting lines like across the dots, I go into a dot, like through the edge. Like this is my edge, and I've just done that. What that does is it actually cuts your line. I'll explain. I'll do like a 2 by 3 here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm just going to do a line, a thicker line with my pencil, instead of just drawing both sides. So I go up like this, go up like that. It's going to come around go like this, go down like that. It's going to go up here, and it would just turn and go through here and then come around and be 1 strand. But instead, what I'm going to do, because I have this obstruction that's sort of interrupting where it would go, I'm just going to go off. And now I'm like, okay, let's finish this one because I started in the corner. Let's go in the other direction. It's going to go through here. It's going to go through here. And it's cut off again. So all I've done, this would typically just close here. All I've done by doing this obstruction through the wall is I've cut the line that would be there. And now I can, do little things. I can do something with these lines. I could connect to another interlace thing I've done somewhere else, or I can have a cursive word that goes into the interlace, whatever kind of design thing you want to do. So that's why cutting through the wall can be useful sometimes. But in general, that's not something you usually want to do. You want to have a closed loop. But there is a way to do it. You basically cut through the middle of a square out the wall. So that's one thing you can do. I'm going to actually start filling one in. Oh, actually, I think it would be useful to show me doing a bordered one. As I was talking, I think I just decided that I did. Oh, wait, I don't want a dot there. I think I decided that I did want to do day borders again, because I think it would be useful also to explain how you can do text. And the way to put text inside is just basically, like I kind of briefly mentioned, you can make a box. You're basically just making a box for your word. And sometimes I like to just kind of mentally think how many squares I want on either side. I don't have a lot of space for my top of Monday. Monday's probably just going to take both of these, like, it just gets interrupted. Might have a thematic reason to break that, because then I still have more space for my other days of the week: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Monday is going to be the space where I have extra stuff because of this sticker thing that I did. So I kind of just want a width of 1 for my Monday border. So I'm going to just imagine I have a width of 1 here, and I might need like a width of a height of 2 for my Monday label. So I'm just going to put my Monday here. It's going to be the 16th, right? Yeah. Okay. I will explain my writing in a bit, but yeah, that's my label for Monday and the date. And then I'm going to see where my box needs to end here. It's going to probably end over here. And then I have a 1 by 1 around it. So I'm just kind of roughly outline that because I'm going to erase the pencil anyway. So I just need to put dots in the middle of these squares to sort of roughly have this. Now, for a sort of single row like this, it's actually, you almost don't even need the dot lines just because of the way that it goes. I'm going to turn this diagonally because it might be easier to see as I draw it. I'm going to start my corner. It might be a little hard to see, but I'm going to start my corner and just kind of draw the line. It's going to go up and it's going to turn because it hits a wall immediately. And what I'm going to end up with, I know this because it's a 1 by 1 strand. I'm just going to end up with, it's a 1 by 1 lane. I'm going to end up with 2 strands that just completely interlock because I'm not putting any obstructions. If you only have a space of 1 block and you put an obstruction, like say here, all you've done is you're just going to elongate the sort of strand there. And that's not the center. I'm going to do double, just so you can see what that looks like. I'm just going to do a double obstruction at the top. It's going to go around, that's going to go around. I'm not trying to make it look super nice because I'm going to go over it with a different color pen after. So you can see I just have to stretch this out because I'm not hitting my obstruction. I'm not going to turn until I get to the other side of this thing down here. So then I go up, go through here, and it reconnects with my original line. So that's 1 strand, and this strand hugs the corners of the bottom, and then I'm going to have another one that hugs the corners of the top. So I'm just going to start where I skipped first here. My second strand is just going to go through, and this is the look you end up with when you only have one, like a space of 1 square you end up with just sort of this alternating, very simple design, and it looks really bad right now because I'm trying to do this while filming. And I've learned that this is a lot harder. I mean, I expected it to be hard, but it's a lot harder than I expected it to be even. Drawing this with a camera in front of my face. Well, it's my phone. My phone is the camera. But that's sort of what it ends up looking like if you just have a strand of one, and you can see what the obstruction did. All it did was elongate this. And sometimes you can use it to your advantage, especially if you're just using one line rather than sort of that ribbon thing that I was drawing before. You might make this a lot bigger and have space to write something in that sort of elongated space. Or put like a little symbol or something in there, you know, or a little label or a number for the date or something like that. But yeah, that's my little border. I'm going to go over this with a different color pen later. I have like a gold gel pen that I'm going to go over it with, so I'll do that later. I just wanted to show you what this was like. So what I'm going to do now is, and this spread is going to look a little bit different from this last one that I did because I put a border outside of my actual weekly. My weekly is these two, this width of 2 thing that goes down here, this bar is here and here. That's going to be my weekly schedule. And I put a border outside of that this time. So my pages are actually a little bit smaller than on the prior page, but I found that I didn't actually need all this space this past week, so I'm like, I can do with less space. Especially because this week, Monday's a holiday in the US, so I don't actually have work this day, so I have more space to just sort of do something else. All right, so I have already pre-blocked some of my dots for what I want to do for my border, so I'm just going to go ahead and start doing that while talking about this. So I might go back up so you can see more of the book there. Sorry, adjusting this is pretty tricky. Okay. So, I have the outside border, but I kind of wanted an inside border as well, so I just have a 1 by 1 that I have going down here. I didn't want a dot there, so I'm going to ignore that. I'm just going to go like this. Just a long obstruction in the middle. There we go. And since this doesn't have corners, it's just a line, it's just one strand. Oh wait, that's not the end. The end is up here. Whoops. And I'll use my eraser to erase those dots and lines in a bit. Now there's one on this side too, because I just wanted a nice inside border for the actual text. I have some corners that I'll explain in a second. The corners I actually used another sort of, it's the same sort of overall technique, but it's a little bit weird with the way that I did the border here. So I'll explain how I did this diagonal border when we get there. But let me just do this side now. Kind of like, I'm doing this very like rough and messy, but I kind of like how it looks as a result. Trying to give it like a loose feel, like it's not tied very tight. So I started doing interlace a long time ago. I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think I started when I was in high school, which would have been in like 2009, 2010. So I've been doing this for a very long time, and I found it very useful just as a de-stressing tool, like sort of like art therapy. And I would use this also when I was in class, because I'm a very auditory learner when it comes to things. Like I like listening to voices and sort of taking in information. But I think there's a bit of like kinesthetic aspect to me being able to do something while I'm listening and learning to something. It's not multitasking so much, because multitasking does not actually help me retain information, really. But doing something physically sort of mindless, or not, it's not quite mindless. I do pay attention to what I'm doing, but just sort of this kind of doodling while listening to like a lecture, especially in college, it was very useful for me to just kind of like do knots, sometimes around notes I was taking, take some notes of like important things that I didn't think I would remember, and like do little knots around important stuff, almost like highlighting it. And I found that really useful. And oh yeah, and I'm doing these on the inside pages too, so it matches up. So the border's still there when you have this page open. I think I'm going the other way with this one. No, I'm going the same way with all of them. Okay. Doesn't matter that much. I'm going to do my double as I go this time, I think. I'm just sort of doubling it over to make the line a bit thicker as I go. Okay, and there's one more. And it's on this side. Oh, and the one from the other side kind of bled through, but I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to just trace over it. So it's going to go in the opposite direction, but that's okay. Yeah, I don't remember the name of this journal, but what I have learned is that it has kind of thin paper, and so pretty much everything, you can see like colors from my highlighter dots on the other page bled through, but once I draw the knots here, it won't be as noticeable, hopefully. But yeah, I find this really relaxing. This kind of art, just any kind of doodling, is usually pretty nice, I've found, for people, but I really like the result of this kind of doodling, just how it looks. Makes me feel like my journal is like a not quite like an illuminated manuscript. I mean, maybe this part, because there's the gold illumination, but it just makes it feel nice and fancy. So, all right, I'm going to explain these corners. So what you've seen me do here is I've done my dots, but then I have this diagonal line going. How does that work? Well, it's actually not really there. The real border of this knot layout is actually here. Feels like I'm building something in Minecraft. Everything's a block. So what I've done is there's a border that looks like this, but I want it to hug this. So what I've done is, you can see how the box ends here. Well, I've extended it diagonally going further, more so as like a guide for what I'm going to do when I fill in my knot, because this is going to be a corner where it doubles over itself just because of the shape of this box. And same here. And I know I'm going to have one loop that goes through here because I have a corner and a corner. But at these corners, what I've done is I've drawn a line that goes down here, like through, like kind of coming off of where the corner will be, because that's also going to be an outline for when I'm drawing. So what I'm going to end up with, instead of just a corner, is, and I will show you by doing it, I'm going to leave this blank for now, but I know I'm going to come through this way. So it's going to go through here. And then it's going to go this way and turn. And I'll show you what it actually is going to do at this corner here, because it's the same here as it is here, just in the other direction. So instead of turning around, like what should happen is I should go around like this, right? But because I've sort of extended the edges out, I'm going to go straight through, make a corner, and then go straight through this way and kind of extend. I'm kind of like pulling the edge, so instead of it turning around, I'm like drawing it out to a point and then bringing it back in. And then go this way, and the same thing here. So I'm drawing it out to a point. It's going to have a corner here. So it has like a kind of interesting look. It's like very pointy at the edge. And instead of just a loop, what I'm going to end up with, because I have these lines coming out, is it's going to, just to fill it in more, I'm just going to have these sort of corners here instead. And then it's going to come in. I'm going to give it a sort of point at the end there. And then it has that look. And it kind of looks like a nice, like you put a border on like the binding of a book or something like that, like a metal border kind of thing. That's the look I was going for there. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. There we go. Oh, hello. Someone's in the chat. Hello, chat person. Oh, I'm not able to see my chat on my screen. That's strange. Oh, there we go. Oh, it's just super lagging. I see. Hello. Yeah, so basically if you have a corner, and by a corner I mean if you have your interlace section and you ever have like a corner like this on the edge, you can extend that out, and what you end up doing is you end up making a point instead, and you can round that off. So this is actually how I do circles, and I think I am going to do a circle for Monday. So I might take a break from these corners, I'll come back to them and do a circle here just to show you what that looks like. So to make a circle, you basically do what you would do as a square. Like I said, it's kind of like building something in Minecraft. You just pretend it's round. So I'm going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is just sort of a very small one. So this is super not round, is it? But I can make it more round by bringing it out. So I could go like this. That's not quite a circle. Usually if I want to make a circle, I do like 2 at the end, but I don't have a lot of space here, so I'm just kind of simplifying it. There's another knot technique that is inherently made for circles, and I could do one on another page if you want to see that, because I am enjoying explaining this sort of knot work stuff. But I'm going to fill in the dots like we usually do. And I'm going to just ignore the real sort of corner of the boxes, or do my best to, even though I've drawn them there. And I'm going to think of this more as a circle. So what that's going to mean is that things are going to go out. And I'm not going to put any obstructions here because that might make it a little more complicated. I could do like a little cross here, but what that'll do is it'll just make everything its own loop. So I'm going to start at a corner, but instead of going in this box, this is the edge of my corner. So I'm going to just come up like this, go across, and it goes like this. And then when I'm at here, I use the outer edge, and then I turn around. Go through, and then I turn around. And when you make circles, you end up with a lot more sort of straight lines ironically, in the interlace, like you see the lines are a lot more boxy in order to facilitate the curve of the edge. It's kind of strange that it works like that, but that's how it tends to happen for me. So this is my edge. Because I haven't really put any obstructions, it's just going to be a lot of interlocking loops here. Oh yeah, there's just going to be one third one. It's kind of like when we did the 3x3. It's going to loop around. So we have these corners here, and it's going to loop around like this. So skip it over here. So it's going to come like this, and we're going to do our edge. Go in, come out, go around, turn back, come out, go around, come back. And that's how I did a more circular knot. You're basically just taking what would be corners and stretching them out so that you can round them out. And I could have made this look a lot nicer. I might go over this one with the gel pen again later to make it look nice. I might use my gold. Actually, I might use my silver one for this one. Okay, so let me go back to finishing my corners over here. There's just 4 more. I said parts of this would be a little bit just me drawing. So if you ever want to do more elaborate stuff, but you're worried about the, you know, the method where you sort of obstruct the wall and sort of break your strand, and you're worried about that, the easiest tip I would say for like doing something more elaborate without potentially ruining your knot, if you're worried about that, is just find your, like, use a corner and just extend it. Just kind of drag it out and do whatever cool design you want, and then just loop it back in. Like, you kind of, once you've hit this corner, you're kind of free to do whatever you want over here. You can drag it out and, like, you know, let's go to this corner. I could, like, drag this out and do little loops and loops and loops, and then go back in, and it doesn't matter because it's not really, like, interrupting anything with the rest of my loop. So just using corners to be your way of extending and doing embellishments and stuff is a good way to go if you're worried about sort of ruining the flow of your loops, but you still want to do something a little bit more fancy, like I did here. This is just a corner, but I've drawn it out to be a little bit more pointy looking so that it fills out the sort of triangular shape that I'm in. And I'm using the bleed through to my advantage again. It bled through a little bit here. So I'm just going to do like the inverse of what I would usually do. I think I made a mistake here. Yeah, that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. Okay. I'm probably going to go over these corners with my gold gel pen too, just to make it more. Actually, I have like a more sort of greenish gold one, like a more sort of more olivey metallic color. I might do that for the borders. Looks a little bit more like rusty copper kind of look. Okay. just 2 more. Yeah, with the bleed through on these pages, on a few places, I've actually just glued the next page to it just to give it more, a bit more sturdiness, which it does kind of feel like I'm wasting a page, but I'm not, because I am using the page for its thickness. But if you don't want to do that, one thing I do is, because I've cut out these borders, I save the paper. I keep the paper, and then if there's like just a part that's like really egregiously bled through, I just glue that extra paper over it, and I try to line up with the dots so they don't obstruct my grid. I actually did that a little bit over here in this last week's page. I had a lot of bleed through over here, so I just glued some of the paper, the extra paper from my border, onto it, and I made sure to line up the dots as best as I could. I did that up here too, you can kind of see that. It's a good way to recycle your borders. Use it for the bleed through if you ever have paper that bleeds through. Because I know even with like really good paper, sometimes you have bleed through just because you use like a really inky pen or Sharpie or something. So it can be useful if you. That's kind of another reason why I like doing these Dutch doors, is I end up with like little strips of dot grid that I can then use to cover up mistakes if I don't think my whiteout's going to do well. Or, I mean, my whiteout, this is like kind of cream colored paper, and the whiteout is like white, like really white, so sometimes it doesn't look nice when I white things out if I'm not going to write over it. So sometimes it's just better for me to tape over those extra strips instead. But I also sometimes use it for other things, like I have some books that aren't dot grid or like black paper, and I might use that strip to like write something or do a cool little interlace design with the strip of paper in that other book. Just really a lot of ways that you can kind of recycle the dot grid paper, because dot grids are really useful just for anything, little labels you want to make or something. It looks nice, and dots are a lot less sort of, I don't know, like noticeable, busy than lined paper in my opinion, because they're usually pretty faint anyway. And like it's more faint than a grid, but it has sort of the same function as a grid in that there's straight lines that you can follow. And for my purposes, I like to do interlace a lot, so the dots are really great for that. So the next thing is my border. And you can see my border is pretty elaborate because I made it 2 width. And I've done quite a few obstructions, and I've done like a really long one here. So you can imagine there's going to be one really long strand that goes out here, and there's going to be a slightly less long strand that goes here. And then there's just going to be like a little, like, almost like zigzagging like this inside. And I thought that would be a cool way to sort of mark off the center of the page. But what I usually do is I start at the bottom left corner for these. So I'm going to just go ahead and get into that. And this one, I actually did something I usually don't do. I usually like stop my border at the center, but I'm actually going to try to go over the pages with my knot, which might be a little difficult. I might actually, you know what I might do? The middle of this book is literally on this prior page, so this is my rubber band thing that keeps it together, an elastic. I'm just going to take this out because that's going to make me able to flatten it a little bit better. I'm going to take it out of the journal cover. Okay, but I am going to start at the bottom. And while I'm doing this, because this is going to take a while, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the future projects that I'm going to be doing in my project stream. Because it's been a while that I've been doing the same thing in my project stream, just because I had a very big project that I was doing. But I'm excited to do other things. When I started, the idea of this project stream was just to share some of the many projects that I'm doing outside of Yesterlore and work that I think would be interesting. But then I pretty quickly, like literally the second week of my project stream, got a big project that I had to start, or didn't have to, but chose to start. But it did take up a lot of my project stream, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm excited to branch out and do other stuff now, like I had originally planned. So my first project stream, if you haven't seen it, was me starting to go over a project that I actually did when I was in high school. So if you are familiar with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien at all, famous for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, you might have heard of this book called The Silmarillion, which has a reputation of being notoriously difficult to read, very detailed, and Generally, a lot of people don't read it. But the people who do read it are very passionate about it because it is very good. Who is that? J.R.R. Tolkien. I I know you know who he is, and you're just messing with me. But is that one of those Frodo ones? Not the Silmarillion. Oh gosh. I will be right back. Okay, sorry. I left the room because I wanted to check if Frodo is even named in the Silmarillion. He is. I had a feeling he was named. He gets one mention in the Silmarillion. It says, Frodo the halfling, it is said, at the bidding of Mithrandir, took on himself the burden, and alone with his servant he passed through peril and darkness and came at last in Sauron's despite even to Mount Doom, and there into the fire where it was wrought he cast the great ring of power, and so at last it was unmade and its evil consumed. That's all it says. Yeah, there's a lot of discourse about alone with his servant, but most people have decided that Sam wrote that line himself because he's too humble to name himself in the history of the elves, because Frodo would not have written that. Frodo would not have left Sam out of that narrative 100%. Or like pretty much everyone just agrees that Sam wrote himself out of the Silmarillion. But yes, it is one of those Frodo ones. At least the last chapter is. That's the only mention of Frodo in the entire Lord of the Rings, actually. Bilbo isn't named. He's called a wayfarer who finds the ring. Because the Silmarillion is the history of the elves, and the people who have interactions with them. And if you want more detail about that whole thing, the idea is you just read The Lord of the Rings if you want the detailed version of that story. But yes, anyways, back to my point. The Silmarillion is a book that starts with a chapter on the creation of the universe by heavenly being, well, a god and heavenly beings that he creates. And it's called the Ainulindale. And it's very poetic, and it places very dense. Is that one of those Frodo ones? The Lord of the what? Okay. The Ainulindale is, it means the music of the Ainur. Ainur means holy ones. They're basically like demiurge / angels that God creates. Ignore me, my little jokes. No, it's fun. Basically, they create the universe by singing. They're like a choir, basically, and they sing a song. It's like has lots of themes or motifs in it, and then one of them decides that he doesn't want to follow the script. Or I guess the sheet music or whatever mental abstract thing it's representing. He doesn't want to follow the script, and he wants to make his own theme in the music, and so there's like discord in the music, and he kind of becomes the Satan figure of the Tolkien universe. And basically what ends up happening is that God then tells them, like, hey, that song you just did, you're basically prefiguring the creation of the universe, and now I'm going to make what you sang come to being physically. And then it happens. Wants to go his own way, wants to give up his mom's dreams and follow his own. Yeah, a lot of people are, like, very sympathetic towards Melkor. He does do some very evil things, but at least at the beginning of the story, he just kind of... He's the most powerful of them. He's given the most power by the God character. And so he wants to kind of utilize it against the will. Yeah, don't we all do some very evil things? It's so true. Okay. Can't help being a Taurus. Oh my god. Melkor, can't help being a Taurus. Okay, anyways, when I was in high school, being the nerd that I was and still am, I decided I wanted to translate that story, Ainulindale, into Old English. And there were two motivations for this. One was my aforementioned nerddom. I just really love Old English, as anyone who's watched my channel can tell. And just it was a fun idea. The other reason, though, is because it's something that Tolkien started doing in some places. Imagine being a nerd in high school. Cringe, could not be me. Yeah, so true. You were super not a nerd in high school. I say this because everyone was a nerd about something in high school. Hot take. Being obsessed with sports does count as being a nerd. Having any hobby actually makes you a nerd, in my opinion. If you didn't have a hobby, you were also a nerd. I wasn't. I liked football and hot babes only. Fuck, wait. Yeah. Oh, wait, then I only like... Yeah, I'm gonna type my response to that one. Okay, so... the second reason is, I was beginning to say, Tolkien started doing this, and not quite in the way that I was doing it, in that he composed parts of the Silmarillion originally in Old English, and then translated his compositions, or like rewrote them in modern English. It went the other way in some cases, but it seems very clear that he composed parts of it originally in Old English first, at least to me when I read the History of Middle-earth, which is a really long 12-volume series of the history of how Tolkien came up with all of his ideas. But he imagined that there would be a version of the Silmarillion stories in Old English at one point. And, but, like, it just never was completed. And the Ainulindale, the first chapter in the published Silmarillion, that wasn't the first thing that he ever wrote. By a long stretch. So he never actually got to write that one in Old English. And so when I was in high school, I was like, A, this would be fun, but B, I feel like it's something that the actual Tolkien, if he were around, would appreciate, seeing a version in Old English, because that's what he wanted there to be anyway. And so I did a very close prose translation of the Ainulindale. It echoes the verbiage almost exactly, just in Old English, with some of the syntax changed around to reflect the difference in grammar. I'm looking over it as I have. There are definitely some mistakes I made, and I used some weird spelling conventions at the time that I don't really use anymore when I compose in Old English, but it was pretty good, I would say, for a high school student. And I was very happy with it for a long time, and I shared it in some Old English spaces online, and people seemed to like it. But I've recently wanted to revisit it because uh, it. Oh, yes, it was good. Thank you. Person in the chat knew me in high school, so for context of anyone watching this, the person in chat did know me personally in high school. So they have some context for this. So I wanted to revisit it because one of the things that Tolkien was doing, especially in like the 1920s and 30s, was whoa, someone else in the chat knew me as well. Yeah. He was writing epic poems. He wrote a lot of epic poems about his stories in the Silmarillion. And there was a period of time when his vision for the Silmarillion was very different from what it turned out to be. He ended up writing parts of the Silmarillion in the style that the published one is written in, which is like, it's like basically like a plot summary, but imagine a whole book of plot summary. Like, there are lots of stories in the Silmarillion, but there's not a lot of dialogue. There are parts where you get dialogue and character interactions that are really good, and that's, I think, the parts that people like the best in the Silmarillion, is when he kind of, what people say is, like, he zooms in on certain things, like certain scenes that happen. But for the most part, the book is written in, like, a very... I don't want to say history textbook style. People who don't like the Silmarillion call it a history textbook because that's what it feels like to them. But it's not quite history textbook. It's more like... if someone was sitting at a campfire telling you a story about something that happened for real a long time ago. So they might include some quotes, like they might be like, oh, and then they said this. But for the most part, they're just going to tell you what happened. And that's what reading the Silmarillion feels like. You're just getting like, what happened over the course of thousands of years of Elvish history, because elves are immortal. And so for that reason, it is tedious for some people. But if you can get invested in the characters and what's happening, it is very fun because you get to see how they like evolve and change over centuries. Part of the reason why people have trouble like connecting to the characters is because it's told in such like a sort of zoomed out way, a sort of detached way. But this is something that it just depends on the kind of reader you are. For some people, they can't connect to the characters because they're not getting specific sort of internal motivations of what they feel like. We do get some scenes that we're told explicitly what a character is feeling, but for the most part, you kind of have to infer a lot, or just kind of like put yourself in the shoes of the character and relate on that level to what's happening. And that's what a lot of people who are big fans of the Silmarillion do. Like, I know people who have very, very, very strong and personal feelings about characters in the Silmarillion. So it is a thing that happens. But that plot summary genre that he came to be using later was kind of an accident. When he was starting his stories in the Silmarillion, like way back in the 19-teens, he was writing sort of more like fairy tale style stories. Some of them were literally sort of like origin stories for certain things, like why do cats and dogs not get along? Where did the sun and moon come from? It was very much like mythology, fairy tale vibes. Even he was calling elves fairies interchangeably sometimes in his stories. So they were very much in the fairy tale genre, like Andrew Lang style. And he was very influenced by Andrew Lang. But eventually, what happened was he started writing epic poems. That came next. He was like, I don't want to tell these as fairy tales. I want epic poems because I like poetry, said Tolkien, in a very relatable to me kind of way. So I'm going to write these long epic poems about these stories that happen, like the key stories that he was most interested in the Silmarillion. Things like Beren and Luthien, the fall of Gondolin, which was the first fairy tale he wrote in the sort of Middle-earth universe. The Children of Húrin, those sort of like big, long, they're like the longest chapters of the Silmarillion, and they're the ones that have the most dialogue and characters, because they're the stories that he was most interested in. He started writing epic poems about those. He didn't finish any of them 100%, but he started writing epic poems, and I'm going to ignore the last thing the person said in chat. uh, uh, also, puppies and kitties do get along to me. Yeah, they can. I think it's very clear just from his writing that Tolkien was not a cat person and he was a dog person. He wrote a whole book about a dog called Rover Random. It's a very nice like kids story. It's very cute. He's like a dog that turns into like a little tiny toy dog. um, and yeah, Tolkien was very much a dog person, and it seems like he did not like cats because all of the cat or feline related characters in his stories are evil. So he's very much one of those, like, or at least it seems to me, he never like wrote this explicitly anywhere, but just from how he writes his characters, it seems very clear that he was pro dog, anti cat, like one of those people who thinks cats are evil. Unfortunately, if we're gonna cancel Tolkien over stuff, there are much bigger things to cancel him over. But I think it was not a very nuanced take of him on cats. And I'm not particularly a cat person, but I do like cats. Cats are nice. I don't think all cats in media should be evil. Anyways, that, why do dogs not get along with cats? That story he turned into an epic poem, and the whole cat thing actually went away in that period because it didn't really fit with the tone of his epic poem. But he really enjoyed doing these epic poems, and he wanted to publish them, actually. And it was around the time, it was like leading up to when he started writing The Hobbit. He wanted to get some of these poems published in like an anthology type thing. And that's what the Silmarillion was originally going to be. It was going to be like an anthology of poems, epic poems about these myths that he wrote. The thing is, he never finished writing his myths before when he was in that sort of myth fairy tale mode in the 20s. Or the teens and early 20s. But his plan was to finish his epic poem versions, and then he'd publish those. But the thing is, without the context of the mythology, the poems aren't going to make sense to anyone. Like, who are these characters? What is this setting? Like, the poems by themselves don't do enough to explain the setting and the characters. They explain the characters, some of them, but some of the immortal characters who've been around for centuries, like, the poem just kind of talks like you know who they are. So that was a problem for Tolkien because he really wanted these poems to get published, and he started like sharing them with publishers and other readers and stuff. And when he was sharing them with them, of course, he needed to give them context. He was like, I just realized my hand has been covering what I'm drawing this entire time. Sorry. What he did was, along with his poem, one of his poems, I think it was the Beren and Luthien one, he gave like a plot summary of everything that ever happened in history leading up to that point so that all the context would make sense. So that's sort of where the plot summary came from. Like, he started writing a plot summary for the setting of his poems based on the mythology he'd written earlier. He didn't just like come up with it then. He had the mythology and drafts of it written, but like, just in like fairy tale mode. And here he started writing like synopsis mode, and he kept expanding on the synopsis he wrote for one like editor he sent it to try to get it published. He's like, here's my poem and here's a long explanation so that any of it makes sense to you. And he took that summary, he called it the sketch of the mythology, I think that's what it was called. And this is what I've got so far. You can see it's one strand is connecting all this bottom. That's sort of what it was planning to happen. In the sketch of the mythology that he sent to his editor, he actually kind of liked what he was doing. He was like, actually, this is an interesting way of telling my story, sort of like as if it's a real history, and not just fairy tales and mythology that I was writing. So he took that synopsis he wrote to his editor, who, edited up, like, it didn't get published, needless to say. Like, they were like, this is you're a really good poet, but I don't think anyone's going to want to read this, which is lies, because nowadays, like, those poems are some of his most popular poems. But anyways, at the time, they were like, no one's going to get this. It's really nice, but no one's going to understand. Come back to us when you have something to publish. And then he came back with The Hobbit, and the rest is history. So that's what got him into writing this sort of plot summary mode. And he sort of added on what were called annals. Eventually, he got really into doing that. Annals, if this is a new concept, it's something that you see a lot in like medieval documents. Surprise, surprise that Tolkien would want to do that. But annals are basically like history logs. Like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a good example of that. It will be like, it'll say like a year and then like an important thing that happened that year. So it'll be like, you know, I don't know, 2023, Grimm's lawyer starts doing a bullet journal video. You know, you just like pick something that happened that year that you think is important and you put it there. And that's a lot of how we know a lot of things that happened in history, not direct accounts. Like we have plenty of direct accounts, but one thing that has been useful is finding annals because they give an account. They're not always accurate, you know, like sometimes they're written centuries in retrospect, but they are sometimes their only source for things. And Tolkien started doing that for his universe, and he like was trying to figure out the math of how things should work and stuff. And he started adding that to his. So what he had was like a plot summary, and then he had like sort of a chronicle, like annals that like had little paragraphs for each year or whatever year mattered. What ended up happening was like by the end of the 30s, when he was like finishing The Hobbit. What the Silmarillion looked like was his plan. He wrote some like explanations, like pseudo, like fantasy scientific explanations of like the cosmology as well, like the map of the world, how the atmosphere worked, all that kind of stuff, because he was very into getting all those details straight for his story. He wanted like the moon phases to all match up and stuff. He did this with the Lord of the Rings too. He mapped out what phase the moon would be in every day between when Frodo leaves the Shire and like gets to Mount Doom. He had every sort of day, every moon phase mapped out. That's how detailed he liked to be.